All of the White Houses were for staff. On the west end of our campus, all of those up there next to Building 52 were for the director or the superintendent of the home, for the chief engineer, for the chief surgeon, and for other officers such as the chief of finance and the chief of supply. The director and the engineer and the chief surgeon were all required to live on station at that time. The others, they could live there if they wanted to. A small rent fee was taken out of their salary, but the homes were large, and these men could live there with their families. In the early years, the families had nannies for their children, and they had house servants, cooks, cleaners, and that all came out of their own salary. The VA didn't pay for that. And the other houses around campus that you see were for doctors. Any doctor who wanted to live here with his family could, and paid a rent portion out of his salary. If it's of any interest, I met a gentleman from Kingsport who used to live here as a child with his father. His father was chief quartermaster or supply, and they lived up behind Building 52. And he talked about going to grade school in Johnson City, and all his friends wanted to come out and see what the friends called his mansion. Mountain Home had indoor toilets, flush toilets, which didn't really exist in Johnson City early on. And we had our own power plant, so it had electricity. So they had electric lights when people in Johnson City were still using kerosene lights. So the kids wanted to come out and see these marvels, these new marvelous things that were going out here that weren't going on anywhere else in town. Yeah, they had no responsibilities, of course, here. Just the man of the house worked here. But the families just went about their daily routines. Most of the wives early on had, as I said, housekeepers and cooks. So other than planning the menu and taking care of the children, they didn't have a lot to do. And the kids were well managed. If mother wasn't at home, they had a nanny. And so they were well watched. I know this gentleman told me that while living here, he said they had the zoo, and the kids loved to come out and see the animals. And a lot of the deer that were here were tame, and they would take treats over and feed the deer. Of course, we had the lake, and the kids would go down and fish in the lake. So he said it was a terrific life as a kid to live on all these acres. They could go out to the farm. We had horses here for supply wagons coming in and out of the supply warehouse, and the horses were stabled here. We had our own fire department, and the kids would go up and climb on the fire truck. So it was a marvelous life for a kid to live here. They had Fannie the Bear. They had deer. They had elk, some really big elk. They actually had some wolves. Well, Fannie had an enclosure, but she was very skilled at getting out of the enclosure. And she had a couple of keepers that were members of the Dom, and they would use candy and pitchforks. And if they could entice her back with candy, they would. And if they had to herd her back with pitchforks, they would. She was relatively tame, but she liked to wander. And so they were off to have to get her back in her pen. But nobody seemed to be afraid of her. Oh, very big. A lot of the guys in the Dom would go up and give her treats and feed her, and she was overweight. The Dom patients, although they weren't allowed to have pets per se, they made pets out of the squirrels that were in the maple trees all around the buildings. They fed them peanuts and got them to come up on the porches with them. And we had feral cats, and they fed the feral cats. They would sneak food out of the dining hall and feed the cats. And the cats, they were called tree cats because a lot of the maple trees had hollow places in them, and the cats would have their kittens in the hollow places of these trees. And the kittens wouldn't come down until they were weaned. They never saw the ground. And the vets would bring food out of the dining hall and feed them. And we ended up with a feral cat problem in the 70s. We had to have a lot of them trapped and carried away. They just got too plentiful.